Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. So this is our second Biotech Week event hosted by European Biotech. Today's webinar focuses on genome editing in Europe, a young researcher's perspective, and we're very pleased to be co-hosting it with the GeneSprout Initiative. And I will hand over to Nikita Sajeev, co-founder of GeneSprout, in just a moment. First, I will briefly present European Biotech and Biotech Week. So European Biotech is the European Association for Bioindustries. We represent the biotech sector in Europe across both agriculture, healthcare, and industrial biotech. My name is Lucy McMurtry, and I work in the agricultural biotech team. Every year, European Biotech organizes the European Biotech Week. This year's is the 8th edition, following the first one in 2013, which was organized to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the discovery of DNA, which is a key molecule in biotech and one we'll discuss in more detail very shortly. This year we have over 100 events in 16 countries. This is just one of the many. And for the whole portfolio, you can check out biotechweek.org. So now I will hand over to today's moderator, Nikita Sajeev, who's the co-founder of the GeneSprout Initiative. She will introduce both GeneSprout and today's panelists. Thank you all very much for joining.
Thank you, Lucy. Good afternoon again. On behalf of GeneSprout Initiative and European Biotech, I would like to welcome all the panelists, the organizers, and the online viewers to this dialogue event, Plant Genome Editing in Europe, and a young researcher's perspective. As Lucy already introduced me, my name is Nikita Sajeev. I am a PhD student at Wageningen University, and my research focuses on understanding the molecular regulation of seed germination, with the hope that in the end we can provide farmers with high quality seeds. Apart from that, I also am a co-founder of the GeneSprout Initiative, and I would like to introduce our initiative before we start this dialogue discussion. So I'm going to quickly share a short PowerPoint. Yep. While the panelists can help me, can you all look at the, great, so it's there. GeneSprout Initiative is a young researcher initiative, and it was founded originally in Wageningen University with a group of young researchers, all passionate about research. But when we started this initiative, it was just after the 2018 ruling made by the ECJ, the European Court of Justice, which made it practically impossible for plants that had been modified using plant genome editing techniques to ever reach the market. Now, this deeply affected us as young researchers because we felt that our voice was not heard on this topic, and we felt that there was hardly any debate about these techniques or an open dialogue with the public or with all stakeholders involved before such a decision was made. And it was for this reason that we started the GeneSprout Initiative. Next slide. So we started it so that we could get more and more young researchers to have a platform where they can involve themselves in science communication, make their voice be heard, but also interact with the public. Our main objectives are kind of 3 or 4-fold to say, but they're all interrelated. So our first thing is that we want to inform society about what plant genome editing is. And we do that via our social media, but we also do it via our website, where we have education modules to explain exactly what these techniques are, how are they different from conventional breeding, and what are the benefits of these techniques, and what is the current status of these techniques. But we also host open dialogue events. Before the COVID-19 situation, we did it in person, in bars and cafes, and we did it with young political parties. We did it with general public. We did it with organic breeders. But now we're happy that we can do this with European Biotech online. But we are pro open dialogue to understand why the public feels a certain way and what is their perception, because it is important to us young researchers as well. Thirdly, we want to be a voice for young researchers because we think that science communication should also be part of our scientific development. We should also let people outside of the lab know what we are doing inside the lab and be open and transparent about it. Because we do think people are very interested and people would like to know if we just explain it to them. And that leads us to the next point, which is, yeah, we want to have a voice. We want to have our concerns also known. Policymakers who make these decisions or influence decisions based on plant genome editing. So with that, we try to do this with GeneSprout Initiative. And now that I've introduced our initiative, I want to welcome you again to this nice online event. And I'm super excited because we have 4 fantastic young researchers from all over the world. And one note that I would like to bring across is that we are going to talk about plant genome editing or new plant breeding techniques. But in this event and what we refer to with plant genome editing are only those changes in which the final plant product obtained via these techniques can be genetically similar to plants that are obtained via conventional breeding or a plant that you could just for chance happen to find in nature. So these are genetically similar plants that you get in the end using these techniques. With that, I would like to now talk about today's event. I will shortly introduce all the panel members, and then we will start this discussion about what do we think and why do we think it, and are we hopeful, are we not hopeful? But we're going to be honest about it, and we're just going to talk from the heart. And in the end, we will also have time for audience questions. So there's a chat function, there's a Q&A box at the bottom. Please post your questions. Please feel free to do that. And we will try our best to answer all of them if they're very little questions, and some of them if they are too many questions. So with that, I will introduce our first panel member, and I would like to start with Francesco Kapai. He's originally from Italy, from Bologna. But currently, he's a PhD researcher at the University of Florida in the USA. He specializes in plant genome editing and molecular breeding. His favorite plant is the blueberry, or maybe I'm talking on his behalf, but that's what he conducted most of his research on, so I would like to welcome Francesco. Next, we have Shir Sangrin. I tried to pronounce this right, but probably was wrong. But he comes from Norway, but where he did his master's and his bachelor's. And now he's doing his PhD in Sweden, where he's working on the precision breeding of oilseed species using, guess what, CRISPR-Cas9 at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. So we're very happy to have him on board as well. And I guess we will hear from him how things are in Norway and in Sweden. Next, I would like to welcome Yarin Aknin. And she is doing her PhD in molecular biology at the Faculty of Agriculture at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, Israel. Her project is aimed to improve or enhance the nutritional qualities of lettuce, so she works in a crop as well, via plant genome editing, tools like CRISPR-Cas9. She's a great believer in the potential of these techniques and plants that are made via these techniques for problem solving, like climate change, pollution, nutrition, health. Well, she just wants to turn all the scientific innovation into applicable solutions. That is her aim. So we're very happy to have Yarin and also hear her views today. Finally, I would like to introduce a fellow board member, Julian Lindstra, who is a PhD candidate from the biochemistry department at Wageningen University here in the Netherlands. And in his research, he needs to make such precise changes to the genes that he needs to use these techniques, especially if he needs to apply his knowledge into crops, then he thinks it's almost impossible without using genome editing techniques. But in Europe, these crops would be labeled as GMO, making it almost impossible that these crops will ever see the light of day. And this was the reason why Juriaan joined the GeneSprout Initiative, because he thought that he needed his voice, but also all the young researchers' voices to be heard, whose voices weren't heard in the past. So welcome all of you, and now I will stop sharing this presentation so we can start with our actual discussion. Yeah, I see all of you now quite big, so that's nice. So how do you guys feel? You.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Nikita. Now we see again the standard background of a young researcher's perspective. Okay, now we see our faces. Fantastic.
Yeah, good.
Awesome. So thank you so much for the introduction. I'll let you take it from here in terms of how do you want to start it and.
Yeah. So I have a very, very simple but a question that I would like some of you or all of you to answer if you have a very clear vision. To start off, you do your bachelor's, your master's, now your PhD, all in the direction of plant sciences. You spend years and years committed to plant research, and you probably will after your PhD as well. What was your motivation to become a plant scientist? Was it just curiosity or was it something else? Maybe, Yarin, you want to start?
Thank you, Nikita. So actually, as you introduced me, I can truly say, and I hope that it doesn't sound too cheesy, that from a very young age, I've been both curious about plants, and since I learned that we could actually manipulate their genomes and create new things with them, also that we could use them to our benefit. And when I say our benefit, I mean not just us humans, but also we could use them to protect the nature that we unfortunately also destroy. So I'm a very practical scientist, I'd like to think, and not just wanting to know how things work, but also how to make them work for our benefit, how to commercialize new products. I come from Israel, which is known as a startup nation, and we're all about ag tech, food tech, and yeah, that's why I'm doing this. I'm definitely thinking about going to industry and business after I'm finished with my PhD, and I hope that I can bring the knowledge that I'm learning and my research skills into that.
Thanks, Yarin. Starting from there, Juriaan, how often have you, since I know you're involved in science communication, how often have you spoken about the research that you do? Because you do use a genetically modified plants in your project. And when you tell this to people outside of academia, what kind of reactions do you get for that?
Usually people are very interested, I would say. I don't really get any people that say, you shouldn't do this. Most of the time, people are very open to listen what I have to say. But doing the research in the lab, I think, is one thing for most people, and actually getting these plants out in the fields, that's another thing. So when I started my project, the plan was actually to use whatever I could find in my research to translate this to crop plants. And the only way to translate my research into the crop plants is actually by using genome editing in plants. There's no other way to get the same kind of variation in the plants unless you happen to find them somewhere, and that's simply impossible. But when I talk to people, they, as I said, they mostly are very interested in hearing what I have to say, and they think it's pretty cool.
But I think that's quite interesting because you said there is a difference between doing the same thing in the lab and people find that very cool. But the minute you say that, I would, or can we do this in the field? Can we introduce it into crops that you would actually eat? Then do you get a different reaction? Or is it still like, that would be cool and that would be very sustainable? Or what is it?
Once I explain them, okay, let me start from the beginning. I also do a lot of talks for GeneSprout Initiative, of course, where I explain people what genome editing really is about, that it's not the same as transgenesis, and these plants are genetically the same as any plant you could find by crossing. And for some people, they still find that a bit unnatural. And that's something that I find very difficult to discuss, because it's really a feeling that they have. Like, it's a feeling that, but it's something technical, so it can't be a normal plant, right? And that's something, it's difficult to talk about.
Sjur, is it the same when you talk to people either in Norway or in Sweden?
So I think, like Juriaan says, that people they're actually quite interested in hearing in what you have to say. First reaction is quite often some skepticism, or they express that this is a topic that's quite unknown to them. It's like something they might have heard about. Sounds a bit dangerous, type of reaction. But when you start talking about it, they found it really cool. But I think like the main issue is that when I talk to Scandinavian people about this, is that it's really in their mind. It's like this genome editing topic is inextricably linked to like modern farming and all the other issues that are real issues with pollution and so on, and like monopoly seed companies. But so it's really hard to like talk about genome editing without having to talk about all these other things that are important things to talk about, but it's not having really that much to do with the tool itself. So I try to explain that this is a tool, you can use it for whatever you want to use it for, and what I want to use it for is to create more healthy crops, improve food security, food diversity, and that's things that people really want to know about and like to have.
So you say that people understand better what the technique is when you explain it to them. However, they have these fears that are linked to either preconceived notions, or they have legitimate fears that, for example, monopolization by companies, or they just have some kind of fear that holds them back from really accepting it completely as something that they would eat.
I think it's mainly to do with it's not something people think about a lot in Scandinavian countries, that you can go to the supermarket and you can buy all these amazing foods, so much variety. Food security is not really a concern. It's relatively cheap.
So it's not a problem of today, and it may be a luxury problem at this moment.
It's not really a problem of today for people living in Scandinavian countries.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you hear about you can read something in the newspaper about Monsanto or pollution issues, and somehow it just becomes linked, difficult to entangle, and no one really wants to do much about it politically wise.
Yeah. Okay, then I would like to move to Francesco, because you are in the States right now, and is it that people are very well informed and actually are okay with it, or is it that they are not informed and don't care about it? Or is it something else? Why do you think people are pro or not caring so much about all the fears linked to GMOs, even the conventional GMOs?
So you asked me a very good question, and I think that there are a number of reasons, and some of them are mostly historical. So GMOs in general, new breeding technologies used to be a really hot topic. Now, Americans have sort of cast them aside for a minute, just because they're busy with some very important ethical dilemmas at the moment, such as should billionaires pay taxes, or is it okay to shoot at each other with machine guns? So those are dominating the political landscape. But aside from jokes, GMOs are not as problematic as it used to be, because there's also a historical perspective here. The US really embraces technological innovation as a nation. So there is not that climate of mistrust that I perceive sometimes in Europe. When they see a new technological gadget, they're all excited about it. That is the standard reaction to it. And that somehow translates to also agricultural innovation. Now, I feel that most of the mistrust that I perceived comes from when the topic drifts towards corporations and agricultural innovations in the context of corporations. Now, there is a long tradition of corporations putting their economic interest before the interest of consumers. Is it true? Is it not true? It's of course debatable, but this is the perceived message by the general public. So that becomes a little bit of a touchy topic with most people. So I would say, as long as you approach the topic by saying, hey, this is a really cool technology that can solve some of the problems we all care about, which is true. It can help us tackle climate change. It can help us make fruits more nutritious. It can really, it's a tool. It's not an end, you know? So that really helps us start this kind of conversation. And I have the impression that people get really excited here.
Okay, so you think that people are very welcoming to new technology first and then think about maybe if there is a mistrust or something. That's not the first reaction. The first reaction of people in the US is more, oh, a new technology, this must be good for us. But that is probably not the environment. I mean, do you agree with that, Juriaan? Do you think that in Europe it is really based on mistrust and maybe it's based on mistrust from the past?
I think so. When you look at the legislation in Europe, the original legislation around GMOs was written in the 80s or close to the 90s. And it was around the time that recombinant DNA techniques were just invented, and we didn't really know the risks yet. So there was if I recall it correctly, there was a meeting around that time of scientists and other stakeholders, and they kind of decided, okay, we don't know what kind of risks recombinant DNA techniques have, so let's be cautious and be careful with releasing these products in the field. And they were also talking about transgenic animals, by the way, not only plants. In there was a clause that said, okay, at some point when the risks are known and we know more, then we should update this legislation. And that has not happened so far. So there, in the legislation, there's also an annex that says if you make plants using mutagenesis techniques, such as using UV light or adding chemicals that cause DNA changes, that's fine. They have been used in the past 50 years and no one has ever been sick from it, so they are fine. They still technically count as GMOs, but they don't have to be regulated as such. And as long as that legislation is in place as it is, I don't see that it would change soon.
Okay, yeah. I mean, so when you think of the ruling that happened in 2018, do you think that personally, maybe not just you, but just, I mean, research in general in Europe will be hampered, or there will be some kind of restriction or limitations for research in Europe? Just research. I don't mean trade and other things, but research.
Yeah, I think so. I can't really speak of any other countries in the EU apart from the Netherlands, but here, whenever we want funding for our projects, we have to get companies involved. They have to pay part of the project. And if we have a project where we use CRISPR to make certain mutants or something, usually they're not that interested, because how are they going to use these kind of variation if they can't replicate them in their plants? So a lot of research after the ECE ruling, there were a lot of projects in the pipeline that were cancelled because funding just dried up. There were companies that pulled back, like, yeah, we're not interested in it anymore.
Yeah. And for Sjur, you said that people are pro or they're very interested, but do you also feel that, like in Norway, they have the three-tier approach proposal for regulating this? Do you think that that is something that will work and is a good way forward instead of just regulating them as GMOs?
So in Norway, there's been an even stricter GMO regulation than in the European Union. It's really perma-ban, essentially. No GMOs in the field. But now there's a proposal for new regulations. People see that it's time to update these laws. We have new knowledge. So they suggest a three-tiered approach, where it's like tier one is essentially any changes that can happen naturally, like in genome editing. It can happen naturally. You just need to roll the dice, 1 million, 2 million, 50 million times. It can happen. And then tier two, it will be like cisgenesis. you take an apple gene, insert it into another apple, and tier 3, the traditional GMO transgenesis. And I think this is probably a much better approach than what we have right now, especially because so you don't need to, people can still, if they choose to, have strict GMO transgenesis laws without hampering, the introduction, the use of these new technologies in the same way. I think this might actually have a chance of passing and becoming part of law within the next couple of years, which would be quite interesting if we go from having one of the strictest regulations in Europe to having one of the more lenient ones.
Yeah.
But time will tell.
And Yarin, in Israel, how is the regulation right now? Because I was trying to read up a bit on it, but I think you know better that it's not as strict as how it is in the EU. So would you like to explain how it is different from the conventional GMOs?
Okay, so Israel is actually not a part of the European Union, although we do take part in the Eurovision. But we are actually between 3 continents. We are between Europe, Asia, and Africa. So we're not part of the European Union. We have our own laws about this. And the regulation in Israel is that, as far as I know, and I'm a scientist, not a law student, but still, as far as I know, we have a committee that is permitted to give these permissions to growing GMOs out in the field, but very few products actually make it to that stage. And the reason is also because we are a very small country, and a lot of our agricultural products are exported to Europe. And a lot of farmers here and companies here do not want to get involved into GMOs because they don't want their European market to be affected by this. They don't want customers to start thinking, wait, this grew in Israel. I know that they have GMOs there. Maybe something happened to get into my plate that I don't want to eat. And so even though the regulations do permit growing GMOs here after getting the right permission, we simply barely do any of it.
That's actually quite, that's not so nice to actually hear that's actually the situation. So it seems like even if it is relaxed in a way, that, yeah, public perception plays a huge role. And how as a young scientist, where do you think that the problem lies? Is it that the people are not knowing the facts, or is it just feeling based? And do you think, is there a hope for where we can intervene as young scientists? Maybe we can start with Yarin itself, and then we guys just drop in if you think you want to add something.
So I definitely think it's a public perception issue for sure. And as I said, because the regulation here is more relaxed, I don't think GMOs is a topic that is often debated. However, when I do speak to friends which are not scientists, they do seem to have an opinion just by sometimes seeing labels on products that says, oh, this is a non-GMO tofu or whatever, even though it's not even necessarily required here. But it seems to be something that you should be afraid of because it has this label. So it's mainly fear and emotional thoughts rather than knowledge-based. I, for example, because I do work with CRISPR and I do create edited plants, my boyfriend's parents asked me about this, and I tried to explain to them what I do in the lab. This is just an example, of course. And after giving a very long of what I thought was my best description of what I'm doing and how I affect the DNA, which are very small changes that may have happened in nature, et cetera, at the end of this entire lecture, my boyfriend's dad looks at me and says, but how do you know that you're not going to create a monster? And then hearing a sentence like that, I just understand that it's something emotional that I can't really change just with facts alone. And I think maybe we as young scientists that would like to change this situation should also perhaps turn to this emotional side and start talking about what happens if we don't use this new technology. Again, what happens when the temperatures become higher and the crops that we grow now will just not survive in the heat, or where we have less land that we can use for agriculture. These are problems that should also make people fear. And yeah.
So to frame it more in the sense that what if we don't adapt these techniques? What could happen? But do you think, or maybe I can go to Juriaan for that, do you think that people actually still don't see it as a problem right now, so they don't think about it, that, you know, we can solve it by reducing food wastage, using organic agriculture and everything else, but this always seems to, genome editing always goes to like,
the backhand.
The backhand, yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Yarin said. I had the same experience when I was talking to a random group of people where I was asked to present about new plant breeding techniques. Also, the same idea, the same response. After I explained everything, I gave them the science behind genome editing. There was one girl who said, "Yeah, it just doesn't feel right with me," and that's very difficult to tackle, I find.
But for Francesco, do you face the same thing when you talk to people? Do they also tell you that it doesn't feel natural, or that it doesn't make sense, or it doesn't feel right? Do you also experience the same conversation in the US?
So sometimes I do. I think that we have to frame the problem a little bit differently. So I feel that we often, as scientists, we do recognize the importance of climate change, for example, and we use it a lot as a way to address the emotion of the public. The reality is that most of the public just kind of generally cares about climate change, but they're not willing to put their health, on the line for climate change. So sort of let's look at the priorities here. Let's sort of recognize that humans do have a selfish component in them, unfortunately. So if there is one thing we can count on, is that humans have this self-preservation instinct. So let's use that to the benefit of everybody, and the example that I always like to make in this case is seedless watermelons. Why do we not see crowds with torches and pitchforks raiding seedless watermelon fields, right? And seedless watermelons were created using similar technologies, using mutagenesis, for example. And yet we don't see people angry about it. And that is because seedless watermelons are incredibly convenient and people like them. And so they are the ones getting the benefit from it. And so they tend to overlook all of the implications of it. So I feel that this is one of the ways that we can really start addressing the way we talk about it to people.
Yeah.
Let's phrase it as something that they can benefit from, because they really can benefit from it. There's a company that just created crunchier veggies using genome editing here in the US. And I'm really looking forward to eating crunchier veggies because they sound exciting.
So you basically say that if scientists frame it that we really need it for the future, because at this moment we are with conventional agriculture doing fine in Europe, because we are in a luxury position where we can say we want only organic foods and we want to grow it this way and that way, but not all of the world can do that. But in Europe we can, so we don't see this immediate need to adopt these techniques. But you say if you appeal to a more consumer-driven, sort of more shallower causes, that works in a way. Does anyone have a comment from the rest of the panel about this?
So I think a lot of people, at least in Scandinavia or the agricultural sector, it's really quite small compared to, so it's not a lot of people intersect with that, and they view agriculture as something that's natural, but in fact it's I mean, the complete opposite of natural. It's, we are manipulating plants and the soil to produce food for human consumption. And, a wild tomato or wild corn, it doesn't look anything like what we eat today and what people would consider healthy. But somehow they see, I think the perception would be that these modern techniques, you have some crazy scientist in a white coat, injecting a tomato with some dangerous chemicals to, make an even bigger tomato that's herbicide resistant. And I think that's also my next point, that people have mostly, at least in Europe, seen these herbicide resistant plants and think, herbicides, do you want more herbicides? No, we don't want that. And then that sounds dangerous, but seedless watermelons, gluten-free wheat, rice with extra vitamins, those are things that they have not really heard that much about. And it comes to like tackling climate change and these things. Of course, possibly genome editing is not the most important issue here, but it's like, do we really want to, are we at the luxury to pick, we can do this, but maybe not that. I mean, I think we should use all of the tools here. And I've seen also, like, I looked at a census from Norway from last year, where they found that this acceptance to these new techniques was really highly correlated to their knowledge and understanding of this topic.
Exactly, yeah.
There's less than like 1 out of 5 that claim to have at least, a very basic understanding of what it really is. So they just don't know.
Yeah. So do you think that maybe we are maybe not doing a great job explaining our research? We are just being scientists, which is our job, to be inside the lab, but we are also the ones who know most about what we're doing, but we're not maybe explaining it in the right way with the public. So what I'm trying to say is, like, if you are a doctor and you tell somebody that, okay, I'm going to give you this experimental drug, I mean, it's never been tried before and it will probably save your life. I think people will go for it. First, because it is a matter of life or death. And second, because you see a doctor, you interact with a doctor, you are getting to know the doctor. But with a scientist, that is very different. We are sort of away from everything. We are in our lab coats, as you said, and people think we're injecting tomatoes. But that's not really what we're doing. So do you think, when it comes to the Netherlands, Juriaan, when you explain about what genome editing is, do people understand that there is a difference between the plants that you get with these new genome editing techniques compared to what a conventional Monsanto GMO is? Like, do they know there's a difference?
Not really. No, if people have some knowledge about it, maybe yes. But for most people, it's a surprise to hear that we have used UV light or chemicals to cause DNA changes, for instance. There are also people that are incredibly surprised when I tell them that cauliflower, broccoli, and cabbage and Brussels sprouts all originate from the same plant. If they don't know it, and then in this case, CRISPR-Cas, it sounds like a technique. GMO is a technique, must be bad. That's kind of the association you see happening.
But when you do explain that, okay, EMS has been allowed for generations, we have never died. Well, we think we never died. We're based on that. And we have the conventional GMO, and now we have new plant breeding techniques. And people, once they understand this difference, I'm not saying are they completely pro, but do they actually, are they more open? Are they accepting?
Especially when I explain to them that in the process of genome editing, we add the Cas9 protein, so the protein that actually makes the change. And indeed, that is not a, let's say, a tomato gene, it's a bacterial gene. But once I show them that if we cross back these two plants, then this foreign protein is removed from the DNA of the plant, and you just end up with a regular plant. If I say it like that, then people indeed think like, oh, okay, but then it doesn't sound so bad.
Okay.
If I may interject there, do you all think that it's possible to sort of spread this level of knowledge to the general public? Because it's something that I've been wondering about. Can we educate people to this point, because these concepts are fairly advanced, and I'm not concerned that people would not understand it. I'm concerned that people would not want to take the time to understand it. You know?
I would like to refer to that, Francesco, and I was just thinking as you were saying this, that maybe our goal is not to educate the entire public, because as you say, not everybody even wants to listen or understand or are able to understand. Even though we can put it in simple terms, it is another thing that you have to think about. And when you think about different kinds of technologies that we have today outside of agriculture or in agriculture, it's not that we ask everybody what they think about these technologies, such as, let's say, artificial intelligence or face recognition or other things that may be dangerous if you use them the wrong way. But what our responsibility should be, I think, is to explain all of this to the regulators who should decide if this is something that should be regulated or should be allowed or not. And this is our responsibility. And I think this is why the European Justice Court decision back in 2018 was so disappointing, because it didn't seem to be based on science and logic, but rather on fear, or I don't know, I'm not even sure, public opinion, which shouldn't affect the regulators that are supposed to take these decisions based on knowledge. So I think this is what we should really address, the people who make these decisions.
I think Juriaan has something to comment on that.
Yeah, it's of course the ECJ ruling was disappointing, but I would at least like to say that they can't really change anything of the legislation. The court was just asked to interpret the legislation in relation to CRISPR-Cas, and then they ruled, okay, because we have this precautionary principle in the legislation, we are not sure yet what kind of changes CRISPR can induce, so that's why we keep it as it is. So they don't have the power, as far as I know, to change the legislation on the spot.
So you mean that because it's a new technique, there is no proven safety record?
Exactly.
That's the thing that is stopping this to be put in the annex where it's exempted.
Yeah, and I actually do agree that we have to talk with policymakers as well. Yeah. But I think a big part of it is also that we have to talk with the general public. Because in the end, if they also get behind using genome editing to solve climate change or whatever, then that will also push forward ways to new policies.
And do you also, go ahead, Sjur.
It's just that, I mean, people don't, I think when it comes to like explaining a new technology, you don't really need to have a full understanding about how it works. Just, what are the benefits of this? So like, I don't think people have a good understanding about how the internet works, but they really see, the benefits of the applications you can use. So then again, like you have the seedless watermelons and allergen-free nuts. They see this and acknowledge that they would like to use this. What could possibly be wrong with it? And I think it's also important. I think like the big biotech companies, the seed breeding companies, kind of fumbled the ball in the 90s on this PR issue. It's like probably studied if you study PR somewhere, this PR disaster, and that people they don't really trust these big companies on these issues.
Do you think that people actually trust, because as a young researcher, you are doing research and you are actually doing government-funded research as well. You are using the public's money to actually give back to society in the end. Do you think that your voice would be trusted more than all the other voices? And therefore, as a young researcher, do you think that, sharing our research will really make a difference in layman terms, of course? And of course, as you said, you don't have to like say every detail, but talk about the benefits. So
I really believe that, and I think there are censuses that back this up, that researchers from public institutions and also smaller companies to some extent, they're viewed as more trustworthy by the general public. But I think also people from academia are also partly to blame here, in that we haven't really been able to explain this in layman terms. We use difficult jargon, and come across as odd creatures, difficult language. So definitely, but I think we're considered more trustworthy, especially the younger ones. But I think that's also because we are a bit more trained or aware of the language we use than.
Yeah, I mean, how many professors or really old people in your university are involved in science communication as a quite regular part of their job? It's not something you see that very often.
That's a task that often falls on the junior researchers, and that might be a good thing, but
yeah.
I'm not sure if it's supposed to be. It should be that way. Yeah.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, if I might add something to that. Well, also, I absolutely loved Odd Creatures. Loved it. But if I may add something to that, you mentioned how some people from smaller companies could also intervene in this debate. And something that I'm aware of is that this could happen in the US, where there are some smaller companies that are involved in gene editing. And this is because gene editing is not a multi-billion endeavor, because regulations are fairly reasonable. Now, something that probably consumers are not aware of is that these super stringent regulations make sure that only the super gigantic corporations can afford putting in place this research pipeline. And in that way, they are the only ones who control this higher end market. And so we don't have people that are from smaller gene editing companies in Europe because they don't exist, because they cannot raise the capital funds to do it. Because if you raise $100 million or euros for a startup company in gene editing, they all go in a field trial. That's the end of the company. And so something that we should also debate at some point is, how do we create an environment that allows these smaller companies to thrive and allows the European economies to thrive as well? Because something that we often do not hear about is how in the seed business and in similar businesses, Europe is losing a ton of possibilities to the Americans. And like, the Americans are 20 years ahead. They dominate the market, and Europeans are just like, we'll just let you have it. We don't really need it. Let me, make this 20 bags of organic seed. So we're really missing out on an opportunity also economically that could really revitalize our economy and offer employment to people. Which is really important.
But Francesco, I think Juriaan can comment more on that. That there is a fear in Europe that actually the smaller companies will be at a disadvantage if the rules are relaxed. So it's actually, they have this feeling. But maybe Juriaan, you could comment on that. That what do people think actually about this?
Yeah, because I think I'm absolutely agreeing with Francesco that using new plant breeding techniques would be a boon to smaller companies to indeed compete with the large ones and take a niche out of their market domination or whatever. But you can also say that once the regulations are relaxed, the big agri firms have so much capital that they can suddenly pour into research in CRISPR that they are the ones who will get the plants out first on the market and have a first mover's advantage. So that's the other side of the coin. And I don't know what will happen, but it could be one of the two. What I do know, at least, is that the Dutch companies at the moment are still very confident that they can use conventional breeding to compete also on the worldwide markets. But I agree with Francesco that in 20 years from now, maybe even 10 years from now, I don't see that happening.
So you see that Europe will really lag behind, not only in sort of research that we already talked about, but also in trade.
Yeah, I think so.
It will lag behind. Okay, but do you think that people are aware of that, or they really just think that, as you said, they think that it's not going to happen? or?
Well, no, I mean, consumers probably don't think about it too much, the average consumer, but farmers are definitely aware. Farmers are already thinking like, yeah, I'm growing stuff here that goes abroad, that goes to South America, that goes to China or whatever, because we are a huge producer of tomato seeds, for instance. But once a company in America has a better tomato and your country allows the growth of CRISPR-Cas plants, then why not choose that one? Why go for the inferior product from Europe? And that's what I'm worried about.
And do you think, so in Europe, it's a lot about sustainability. So maybe, like we're always thinking, okay, organic agriculture is very sustainable. But yeah, well, so what are your thoughts of that? I mean, whenever you compare plant genome editing to organic foods, people are always thinking organic food is the way for sustainability. But that's not just for organic foods, that's also for plant genome editing. So maybe you can say something on that, how do you think that plant genome editing contributes to sustainable food production?
Well, actually, I think they go hand in hand. And for some reason, there seems to be this concept that organic foods should also be non-GMO or non-gene edited or whatever. But I think it's actually the opposite. The only way to grow plants in a sustainable way and to make them organic, meaning that we use less pesticides, less fertilizers, which release greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. The only way to do it is by using gene editing and to improve the crops that we're growing. In fact, I was meeting with a professor in the Weizmann Institute of Science that we have here in Israel, which is a pretty important institute here. And he told me of his concept of, I think he called it organic crops, meaning crops that are grown in an organic manner, but are gene edited and are fit to be grown in these conditions, meaning that they already have resistance to pests, for example, or already can grow in harsher climates, etc., and don't need all of this additions that we try to avoid in organic agriculture. So I think it's actually more sustainable.
Yeah, so the combination would actually be more sustainable because organic agriculture in some special situations is also allowed to use chemical inputs at some point, and very specific ones, but it can still have it. So actually it would be better to combine both of them. But do you see that happening?
If I well understand organic agriculture, and I'm not a specialist, organic agriculture is allowed to use chemical inputs all the time, but these chemical inputs need to be naturally derived, which does not make any assumption or only makes partial assumptions on the toxicity of said compounds. The example that I have in mind is copper sulfate, which is highly toxic but natural, and it's extensively used in organic agriculture, right? As a pesticide, if I'm not mistaken, or a fungicide. So just to clarify here for the audience, organic agriculture does use chemical inputs. It does have some advantages. It does have less residues in some aspects, but it also has more in some other aspects. So just for the audience to be aware of this.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. It's a good point.
Sorry.
No, it's a good point because indeed, I don't think everyone is aware of that well. But indeed, organic agriculture is a very good way to do agriculture, and I think as young researchers on the plant biotechnology side, we are very open to it, to actually go together with this. But I think there is an opposition sometimes from the other side that this is not according to organic principles, so we shouldn't use it. But do you see that side opening up, or do you see a difference between the younger generation of organic agriculture compared to the older generation of organic agriculture? Does someone have a comment?
I'm going to say maybe a little bit something about this.
Yeah.
So when we think about organic agriculture, most people think about good old Billy farming his little farm in Wyoming. and producing his little crop. That is not the reality of organic agriculture. Organic agriculture is gigantic farms doing this in an organic manner. So both realities exist, right? And we can talk to both realities. Certain firms may be more open than others, but I would agree with you that there is a lot of resistance there, but that resistance is there because consumers have resistance, because these actors are companies which ultimately act like businesses. So they're not there to sparkle rainbows over people. They're there to make a profit, even though sometimes they say differently. But anyhow, if we talk to consumers and really show the benefit of certain technologies, I feel that a portion of certain consumers might change their mind or see things differently. But I feel that transparency here is very important because people need to be able to choose freely, and we need to build trust in people.
So as young scientists, do you think that we should play a role in this, at least in Europe, because we need to talk about this more, we need to engage more people, we need to inform people and help them have their own mind about it, because in the end, we don't tell people what to do, we just say what it is. But do you think that proper science communication, which is definitely lacking in Europe, is the hopeful way to change it? And do you think that young scientists are the key for that, or do you think that we should do our research? So maybe Sjur, you can say something on that.
Well, I mean, I think definitely, probably we are a key here, but I would also recognize that a lot of us don't really have the training for it. We might not really have the interest for it also. Yeah. It's not really expected of you to do it either, but I think it is actually paramount to inform the general public and do it in a non-condescending manner. Yeah. And I do think it's probably a good idea that scientists are not allowed to write the rules all by themselves, kind of. Yeah. Even though sometimes I would like to, Yeah. But then it's up to us to show the benefits, to inform the public, and to influence policymakers. Call out bullshit when we see it, when we hear it. I think is especially important in this debate because there are so many myths.
We have so much crap sometimes.
So I feel like that can also be, off-putting for a lot of researchers. That you have to deal with a lot of smear and it's difficult to stick your neck out and talk about these issues when you face. It's not really a proper debate. But I think we should try to. I have full understanding for people that don't want to do it because it's not a pleasant job, I think, to be honest.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you need to face a lot of different opinions, and you need to be.
But facing opinions, that's great. That's what we should do. But when that opinion is it's all over the place, or it's just strawman and myths and stuff like that, it's difficult to have a proper debate. But then the exchange of opinion, great. I would love it.
All right. So
some people said it feels like playing chess with a pigeon. Doesn't matter how good you are at strategizing, the pigeon will just march around the chessboard and do pigeon business on the chessboard. So, but yeah, I agree with you. However, I will say that there are a lot of people, especially in the younger generations, who are really excited about going out and talking to people. And I would say I'm one of them. I get really excited about talking to people. And very often I have been surprised by how much people get excited about ideas. And I was genuinely surprised. So there is hope. That's all I wanted to say.
Oh, that's nice. So we have a few minutes to wrap up this whole discussion. I think it was very, very interesting for me. I don't know, in an online audience, you can't really see the faces to see if, well, people really enjoyed it or not. But I have a question. In the Netherlands, consumers are most often ignorant about how crops are produced and what varieties are and what chemical residues remain in the harvested products. So if it ain't the consumer, what target audience would you pinpoint to convince?
Well, I think you answered that question when we said that actually the broad audience would be great to convince, because public opinion is what usually drives companies and big firms to change and decide where they put their money.
Yeah.
But I think the most important is to reach the regulators and people who make the decisions, so that we can change the regulations regarding gene-edited plants.
Okay. And you?
Yeah, I already answered the question also in the chat.
Okay.
I think as GeneSprout Initiative here in the Netherlands, whenever we talk with the general audience, we mostly focus on the undecided people, because there's a very strong, loud minority here that screams that GMOs are the worst thing to ever happen to in all of humankind. But there's a vast majority that is left undecided and are really interested in learning about it. So with our mission, those are the people that we try to convince, outside of the regulators and stuff.
Okay, so a quick yes or no question, and then we end this discussion. Are you hopeful that things will change for Europe in the coming years? And in the coming years, I mean, well, in the near future?
Yes,
you are hopeful.
Yeah, we have to, I think.
So you're optimistic. That's good.
Yeah.
And what about you, Sjur?
I would love to be optimistic about it, but I think it's there's a lack of political will. It's like a hot potato. Someone needs to drive this, and I don't really see that happening in the near future, unfortunately. But I really hope
fair enough.
It will change.
You're hopeful, but you're also realistic in what your expectations. Well, for Yarin, it's basically, well, in your country you said that it is actually relaxed, but still, do you think that companies or farmers will do it regardless of thinking about public perception, or do you think that it won't change?
Unfortunately, I think now the current trend is to actually back off from new plant breeding techniques, and I see it in the innovation fields. I see that companies invest more money now in stuff like precision agriculture, in bioinformatics, and less about the molecular biology. So I think for the next few years, this is the trend. But I am very, very hopeful that if things will change in the EU, the trend will change also in Israel, and I hope to see more research in this field afterwards.
Nice. And Francesco, do you think there are any pitfalls of not having, in the US, do you think that this unregulation of GMOs, do you see any contra to it, or they're only good, that it's been a boon for the US?
I've been thinking about this a lot. So far, I only see positive things, because I've seen at least 4 smaller companies pop up and entering the market, and they seem to make progress faster than the larger companies, which seems to really revive the market, especially after the Bayer-Monsanto merger, which was this, sort of gargantuan merger in the field. So far, I'm very hopeful, hoping for the best, but expecting the worst. That's kind of my, the way I operate. Nikita, I see that there are a couple more questions in the chat.
Yeah, we will now go to the questions.
Them?
Yeah, we have till 4:15, so we have 10 more minutes for questions.
Fantastic. So I'd like to answer the one that Chris van Klooster asked. Sorry for butchering your name. It's been a long time since I was in the Netherlands. So is it possible to predict the yield increase percentage in agriculture in Europe if NBTs would be allowed in a timeline of, say, 10 years or 50 years? So I would say that your question is a good question. If we had a definitive answer for it, we could go ahead and collect our director position of some very prestigious institute, because this is a very hard question. The answer depends on the crop that you look at. In soybean, a 1% yield gain, you're the god of soybean. In blueberry, the crop I work in, a 10% yield gain is like, all right, you did something. So it really depends on what crop you're working on. I've seen some advance in this field. However, I know this is not the answer to your question, but I think that yield will not be the main trait that gets addressed by new breeding technologies. And this is because yield is usually controlled by hundreds of genes. And so new breeding technologies are fine techniques that modify one gene at a time. And so it would be really technically challenging to address all of those genes at the same time. I see breeding technologies being more involved in quality traits, such as flavor, firmness, seedlessness, or things like that. And I'll leave the floor to the others for this.
Yeah, because I think you make a good point. After the Green Revolution in the 50s, we saw a huge increase in most of the staple crops like wheat, rice, maize. But in the last 20 years or so, the yield has been plateaued because that's, the genes that are involved the most with yield, they are already domesticated in such a way that they increase the yield by a lot. So anything that's left are indeed like this handful of genes that can increase the yield even more. But I do see it indeed also being used not only to change the quality of the fruits, but also in research efficiency, for instance, that we don't have to spray a whole field with nitrogen just to get the plants to produce, or water use efficiency, or less pesticides, or no pesticides. I also think those are very, very valuable traits.
We have a nice question about, well, we're from Pete Spot that says that I like the idea to educate the public, but is it realistic? The Citizens Initiative that I think you have worked with before reached a few thousand, while NGOs occasionally spend millions for such kind of initiatives. So how realistic it is that when you have something like an NGO, which is so massive and spending millions of money, do you think it's realistic for us also to not have those kind of resources and try? Anyone?
To me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. The Citizens Initiative was a great initiative. I was a big fan of that. But it was indeed an initiative started by students. And I noticed it myself as well with GeneSprout. It's so difficult to do this kind of activism next to a full-time job or next to a study. So you have indeed like the NGOs like Greenpeace, they can pump millions in it. And they have a huge PR machine of dedicated people that work there full-time. And there is indeed, it's very difficult to go against something like that. But I also don't really think that for us, at least as GeneSprout Initiative, it's really a goal to be this huge global movement that changes everybody's mind. We just do what we can with the resources that we have, and we try to reach as many people as we can.
And I think with GeneSprout Initiative, we also try to, well, I don't think in the next years, we're trying to approach people, we're trying to get the resources, and we're working on it so that we can do it on a larger scale. But indeed, as PhD students with full-time jobs, that goes a bit more slower because we, in the end, want to get our PhDs as well. But it was disappointing that the Citizens Initiative, did not, but there was no PR machinery like a NGO would have. That's true. That is a legitimate point. But I still, I'm only speaking on behalf of GeneSprout Initiative, but I still think that every undecided person's mind that we reach, it makes sort of a difference. Do we have any more questions? I think that was the last question that we had in the Q&A. With that, I just want to thank all of you because I had a lot of fun talking to all of you and hearing how is it in different places. Some of you I connected well. With Francesco, I connected after a very, very, very long time. And I really hope for the future of our planet, but also our careers and also our mindsets that we grow scientifically, but also with science communication. And I think all of us are hopeful for the best. So yeah, we'll see how it goes, but we'll keep trying our best personally as scientists as well to make this go faster, even if it's just a small step. So thank you all for joining, and thank you, Lucy and European Bio, for actually co-hosting this and inviting us to host an event during the European Biotech Week. Thank you all of you for listening.